Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. For us Michigan fans, this spring practice window has been an absolute blast to follow. And I think I speak for the majority of Michigan fans listening to this. Our conversations have been heavily skewed to quarterback Bryce Underwood, Chip Lindsey coming in and calling the offense in 2025. And, don't get it twisted. It's by far the biggest storyline for us Michigan fans going into 2025. There are a lot of other really intriguing storylines for this Michigan team going into 2025 that, have kind of fell by the wayside. I wanted to dedicate an episode to kind of talking about some other players that have really emerged during spring practice over the last couple of weeks. And I probably want to start with just my two takes around this Michigan team heading into 2025. Most notably, I think this Michigan team clearly loses a lot of top end talent from the team in 2024. I mean, you're talking about five names that will be selected in the top 100 of the NFL draft, headlined by Will Johnson, Mason Graham, but Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, Colson Loveland. I mean, all five of those guys probably going in the top 100. I think there'll be a lot of national media members that look on the surface of this Michigan team and probably assume that it's going to take a step back from 2024 because you lose all that top end talent. Look, this team is deeper and it's arguably more complete than it was in 2024. I think the second thing you want to note is it felt like in 2024 there were a lot of players that were thrusted into action that probably weren't quite ready. I think the best example is probably Evan Link at tackle. Michigan had to replace a lot of really good football players after that national championship year in 2023, along with the brand new coaching staff. And when you replace that much production, sometimes there are players that have to step up that might not necessarily be ready. And we kind of saw that play out in 2024. That's not that these players are going to be bad football players. They just weren't quite ready to start the season in 2024. But as you saw throughout the 2024 year, a lot of those players took some pretty significant steps throughout the duration of 2024. A lot of those guys are coming back. And you kind of feel like to start 2025, a lot of the players that we saw in 2024 that were, played pretty good, but probably weren't quite ready, I think are going to be ready to rock and roll in 2025. Now, who are the names that are kind of stepping up, emerging during spring practice outside of Bryce Underwood? That's the conversation I want to get into. Fired up to do so. A lot of these names we haven't talked about throughout spring practice. Before we get into it, as always, the Michigan fans, just want to say thank you to you guys. And again, as a Michigan fan, I've had an absolute blast talking this football team. Ton of really quality feedback from y'all in the comment section. That's one thing that, kind of rocks about talking ball in the spring is that everybody who's tuned in and everybody who's engaged, you kind of live and breathe the program. And we have a lot of good conversations in the comment section. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's start with cornerback Jair Hill, who, played some really good football in 2024. I think it's important to remind all of us, this kid was a redshirt freshman in the 2024 year and really flashed. The talent, the upside that Jair Hill has is undeniable. I think at times it was a little bit of a roller coaster in the 2024 year, which is to be expected from a redshirt freshman. What you're hearing about Jair Hill going into 2025 is now he's not that young cornerback where you see the light bulb flickering. He's now a veteran cornerback going into year 3 where it's a little bit more consistent. And you go back to the 2024 year again. I mean, he faced 57 targets, only allowed 33 catches. It's a 57% completion percentage, only missed 11% of his tackles. He was good, but at times maybe gave up the big play a little bit. You're looking at potentially a true cornerback one for Michigan going into 2025, and you're hearing all the right things from a guy like Jair Hill. And I'll say this, you get that kind of play from Jair Hill, you can start getting really creative in terms of what you want to do on defense, not only with a guy like Zeke Berry. You can play around playing him at nickel, playing him opposite Jair Hill at boundary. But also if you're Wink Martindale, knowing you got a cornerback that can operate on an island, you can kind of just say, hey, Jair Hill, go to the boundary. We don't have to worry about you. Start getting those safeties involved and start doing a lot of different things that you normally couldn't do if you didn't trust your boundary cornerbacks. Number 2, and this kid seems to be just dominating spring ball, Mason Curtis. What intrigues me most about Mason Curtis is the athletic profile and versatility, which is, and we talked about him a little later last week. Having this kind of versatility in the back end is huge because you look at the landscape of the Big Ten. One week, I think we said this last week, one week you might be going on the road to Kinnick Stadium playing the Iowa Hawkeyes, running a bunch of 12 personnel trying to run the football between the tackles. And then the next week you might be going to Eugene, Oregon. Having a body like Mason Curtis that can do so many different things because of that unique athletic profile. Hey, one week we got to get you really involved stopping the run. Put you at nickel, that big nickel that's almost acting like a third linebacker on the football field. He can do that. But then the next week when you fly out to Eugene, Oregon, that's a big, long body that can operate in coverage. Played safety last year. You're going to see so many different kind of offenses in this league now with the additions of some of these Pac-12 teams, USC, Oregon, UCLA, Washington. Having these kind of bodies that allow you to be really versatile is massive. And it also allows you to get your best players on the football field. Lamar Morgan talked about that earlier this week. Hey, the more versatile we can be with our defenders in the back end, the easier it becomes to get all our best players on the field. So that's like Zeke Berry playing boundary or nickel. If say a guy like Josiah Edmond emerges as a guy that you want on the football field, well, you can put Zeke Berry at nickel, and then you can kick Mason Curtis to safety. If you want to get Brandon Hillman on the football field next to Rod Moore, then you can kick Mason Curtis in the safety because you don't want to leave him off. That versatility is huge, not only because you're going to see a lot of different offenses, but because you got a lot of good players in the back end. Last one on defense, and this is kind of my TJ Guy of the Michigan season in 2025, Dominic Nichols. And what I mean by that is TJ Guy kind of came not necessarily out of nowhere because you kind of tell he was balling out in fall camp. Dominic Nichols might be that guy. Now we expect Derek Moore, who I think is, one of the best edge rushers in the country. TJ Guy, who was a stud for Michigan in 2024. Those are your starting edges. Dominic Nichols kind of that third guy that I think can emerge as really impactful football player. And again, Michigan's getting back to depth on the defensive line, which was something we just didn't have in 2024. We had some really good football players, right? Josiah Stewart, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Derek Moore. That's about as good of a first-line defensive line as you'll see in the country. The problem is there was a little bit of a drop-off when you had to start rotating those bodies. I don't think you're going to see as big of a drop-off. And although you might not necessarily have that Mason Graham kind of football player, being deep on the defensive line is just as good as being super talented. And I think Michigan is a much deeper football team, both out on the edge and on the inside of the defensive line. Kicking to the offensive side of the football, I want to start with Jordan Marshall. And I just put my hand up and say, I might have been wrong. When Justice Haynes is a funny one because I loved him coming out of Mill Creek. When he was coming out of high school, he's a special running back. And I kind of assumed that, all right, Michigan goes and grabs Justice Haynes in the portal. I kind of thought he would be the running back one. That doesn't sound to be the case. In fact, it sounds like Jordan Marshall might be the best back in this room, which is not a shot at Justice Haynes. It's more of like Jordan Marshall might be that guy. And it's not all that surprising to us Michigan fans when you go back and watch him against Alabama. His first career start in that bowl game, 12 missed tackles forced. He is a guy that can give you everything you want at the running back position. And we just did not have a kind of running back like that last year. That's not a shot at Kalel Mullings. It's not a shot at Donovan Edwards. It's just that those two guys were, Kalel Mullings was the battering ram, tack the line of scrimmage, take on contact. But when it got to the second level, when it got to hitting the home run play, that juice probably wasn't there. And then Donovan Edwards had a ton of juice at the second level, but wasn't quite the running back you needed from a physicality standpoint between the tackles. Both Jordan Marshall and Justice Haynes, I think, marry that really well. Kind of like Blake Corum. And they're a different kind of running back, but similar to Blake Corum where, hey, when you needed an ugly yard from Blake Corum to move the chains, Blake Corum could give you that. But when it got to the second level and you had to make a safety miss and go take it 40 yards for a touchdown, Blake Corum could do that too. We're a little bit more complete in the running back room with both Jordan Marshall and Justice Haynes. And the fact that Jordan Marshall has kind of emerged as maybe that guy in the room, again, that tells me more about Jordan Marshall than it does about Justice Haynes. And it's telling me Jordan Marshall might be a stud for Michigan in 2025. Another guy in offense that's been getting in, we weren't really sure what this was going to look like, right? Donovan McCulley coming from Indiana, I think at at the time, we were excited. We wanted bigger, more vertical pass catchers injected into this Michigan offense. But at the time, I think all of us Michigan fans were like, all right, can Donovan McCulley be the wide receiver one for this offense? That question still exists. But you are hearing that Donovan McCulley probably is that wide receiver one as it sits. And it sounds like Donovan McCulley is a hit in the transfer portal in terms of offseason additions, which it sounds like Michigan likes a lot of the transfer portal additions they've made. And that's something to note. Michigan's never going to be a team that takes 25 names in the portal, but historically their evaluations have been really good. You're kind of hoping for that with Donovan McCulley, who I think has more upside than people appreciate. He was a former quarterback that made the transition to a wide receiver in the middle of his collegiate career. There's still some development that can take place as a wide receiver. Then I did a little bit more, work on Donovan McCulley. Went back and watched some of that Indiana tape from 2023. I've probably been painting him in the wrong picture, where I think the biggest asset he brings is what he can do vertically down the field. Zero question about that. That is his strong suit. I think he's a little bit more of a multidimensional guy than I gave him credit for. You go back to the film of him playing Illinois when he was at Indiana in 2023, diverse route tree, guy that could separate, guy that could work the middle of the field, a guy that it can provide you yards after the catch value, not necessarily because he's Samaj Morgan and super twitchy and going to make people miss, but because he's 6'5", 200 plus pounds. There's just not a lot of cornerbacks that can bring that kind of body down. He's physical after the catch. There's a little bit more to Donovan McCulley's game than I appreciated, and you're kind of hearing that throughout spring practice. Hey, we kind of like what we have with Donovan McCulley going into 2025. Now, to me, that's still a position that I would like to see Michigan address in the portal, but I think if you're a Michigan fan, it makes you feel pretty dang good. Last one, Brady Norton, and this one I've been a roller coaster in terms of my expectations of Brady Norton. Michigan goes out and gets him from Cal Poly in the winter. Went back and watched him a little bit. I thought he was really impressive for a redshirt freshman. The question was, can he physically make the transition from the FCS to the Big Ten level? That is a big step up, especially when it comes to line of scrimmage play. And then he weighs in at 275 pounds. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make me feel great about year one Brady Norton being a guy. And then what you hear from spring practice, and Coach Newsom said this, but you're also hearing it from some of the other players and sources too, is that jump in level of competition that we were concerned about doesn't sound to be that big of a deal for Brady Norton. And I think what's so big about that, regardless if Brady Norton starts for Michigan or not, he could provide some very important depth to this offensive line. And what makes Brady Norton special, he can provide you value as a guard, but he also can provide you value as a tackle. And this is a guy that's a tremendous athlete. I liked his tackle film as a redshirt freshman at Cal Poly. Suddenly kind of becomes another name to monitor, as I think a lot of Michigan fans are concerned, hey, is our offensive line good enough? Well, Brady Norton could be an answer, at least an answer in terms of depth on this offensive line. Because Evan Link, look, I have not sold my stock in Evan Link, and I understand why Michigan fans are concerned, because it certainly was not great to start the year in 2024. Listening to him speak this morning, he's like, well, I had never played right tackle until that 2024 year. I played left tackle as a freshman on the scout team. I played left tackle throughout my high school career. There's a little bit of some growing pains at right tackle. Then he makes the switch back to left tackle for the Alabama game. I thought he played some quality football. Hey, maybe Evan Link, who was also just a young cat in 2024, as a redshirt freshman, maybe he takes the steps necessary to be a starting caliber tackle for Michigan. He's up to 335 pounds. We'll see how it plays out. But to hear that Brady Norton can be that he can provide value year one in the system, I think is big news for us Michigan fans. Again, there were a lot of names that we probably could have included in this conversation. I'm sure many Michigan fans have those names. What I would encourage is let it fly in the comment section. Those names that you put in the comment section when we go live, watch the spring game, those are the names we'll probably talk about. Let it fly. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.